Hi, and welcome to today's discussion. I will be talking about how do project managers handle conflict within their team and their stakeholders. Any project manager knows this is a key part of making sure, or one of many key parts of making sure your project is successful. Areas I'll be covering today is areas that I will be covering today will be identifying and acknowledge conflicts. What can you do? Analyzing and understanding these conflicts, and then hopefully working towards resolving these conflicts, and then how you continue to manage and prevent these conflicts moving forward. And that's really, really important to making sure your project, and doesn't matter what anybody says, there will always be conflict in your project. I can guarantee there will be personalities, there will be suppliers, etc., that will cause some sort of conflict, or there will be conflict or disagreement or opinions that need to be managed. And this is one of your stakeholder management skills that will come into its own throughout the project. So let's cover the first part of the discussion. Let's identify and acknowledge conflict. So as part of your project, like we said earlier in many of our other videos, is we need to be reviewing and analyzing our project throughout the project life cycle, right from the start all the way middle, end, and right, and continuously throughout. You need to be able to identify, acknowledge conflict early as possible. Now, that's really understanding where people have disagreements now internally within your own departments or teams, etc., and with the suppliers, third parties, etc. But one of your key elements is really you've got to be an active listener here to identify. You need to be open and understanding to communication, and so that you can be the go-to person within your project. Now, this is really, really important. And one of the things, you've got to try and resolve once you've identified and acknowledged this conflict. One of the things you must not do is do not ignore the conflict. Like with any conflict that you have in any life, if you ignore it, over a period of time, it festers, and as it festers, the problem becomes a lot bigger if not dealt with early. So, you once you've identified, you need to clarify what the issue is. There's bring parties together, etc., identify a solution, and then continue to monitor and flow. But we'll cover that as we go through some of the areas. But identifying key elements of conflict is really done throughout the project. Team meetings, discussion with key stakeholders, and again, document it. Understand that. Now, identifying is really, really key. That's probably one of the hardest part of identifying a key. A lot of people do shy away from identifying a risk and tend to not actually deal with it head on. And my advice would be deal with it head on as quickly as you possibly can. But as soon as you deal with it, the easier it becomes throughout your project. Next, we'll cover is once you've identified it, you need to analyze and understand the conflict. It's really important to understand what the conflict is. Sometimes it's simply because it's just people are misunderstanding each other. Really have a good spend some time understanding the root cause of the problem. There are loads of techniques you can use for analyzing and understanding conflict. Root cause analysis, i.e. what has caused the problem, let's understand it. Whereas you can do traditional SWOT analysis. I've never done it, but it can be done, and I've seen colleagues do it. And then stakeholder analysis. Do you have the right stakeholders involved in your project? Are your stakeholders clearly, who are your stakeholders? Do they clearly understand what their roles are, and are they fully engaged in your project? Now, that's a big one. If they feel as if they're not part of your project, they will not give you today. And then that causes conflict again. But you need to be analyzing, understanding the cause of this conflict, and then looking to resolve it. But again, root cause analysis, really understand what the problem is, and ask the questions that you don't want to ask, because that will give you a clear understanding. And don't be afraid if people want to vent at you, let them vent. It's probably the best way of letting people tell you their problems, and that's with suppliers, third parties, whoever it may be. That will be the so I would say be a good listener. It's really, really important to be a good listener. And once you've analysed and understood the conflicts, really you need to start looking at resolving these conflicts. Now, resolving these conflicts is a little bit more challenging, but I've used a few methods in my time, but you can negotiate depending on the size of the problem. If it's multiple people, you'll need to use a different method. But if it's an individual, approach them, talk to them. If it's a group, you need to bring them together. But I would say, if there was a conflict resolution process I would use to resolve, is my steps would be bring both parties together, lay out the ground rules. Now, this is really, really important. Ground rules is to make sure that people don't end up having a squabbling fight in your meeting. And I would use the word ELMO. If you've never used it, ELMO stands for enough, let's move on, because people do tend to waffle and go on about their individual points. So ELMO is a very, very good term. Used it in many of the sprint meetings I've run, and you can use it as part of your conflict, but use that very strategically, because you can upset somebody if they're already quite heated up in that conversation. So use ELMO very strategically, I would say. Again, then your next step will be find the root cause of the conflict. Then you actively listen to each side to have their say. Now, this is really, really key. Give the individual who have the conflict their opportunity to say their piece fully and to the end, and support that with your documented, and then come up with it, establish some sort of desired outcome. Now, I would kind of throw the ball into your participants area and see if they can actually come up with their own solution. If they can't, you need to facilitate that. Um, that will be your next step. Really get your participants to suggest a potential solution. If they can't, like I said, you need to get involved. And then finally, you need to then document and agree the solution and what must be done to make it happen. And hopefully you've come up with a happy medium. Now, it sounds really easy for me to say, but this can take multiple attempts. Doesn't necessarily happen all the time. But you've got to be persistent. You've got to keep going on and build that rapport with your stakeholders, your third parties, your suppliers, because if they like you, situations like this are very, very easily resolved. If they don't like you, you will struggle. And I have seen that with many project managers who don't have that skill set to build a good rapport with their third parties and struggle when they are a time of need. And I would suggest, build that rapport, be that person they want to be with, and you will be successful. Next, really, is how you manage and prevent the conflicts moving forward. That's really, really key. You need to be really good at making sure that you are keeping on top of these conflicts. Again, log it. Again, you can do this via using multiple techniques, team building activities, conflict resolution training. Personally, I've never done conflict resolution training, but there are organizations out there that do have this as part of their agenda, especially in the sales arena, and some other areas of the business. But again, stakeholder engagement plans, which is really key. Who are you going to manage? How are you going to engage through your plan? Make sure you're engaging the right people at the right time, etc. Really helps to mitigate conflict. Sometimes your conflict is simply you just didn't tell me. Just remember that as a project manager, you could be at fault for not simply telling the right person at the right time. So those are things you need to start managing throughout your project. And again, I think the hardest part as a project manager is really trying to promote a positive team culture and maintaining open communication channels. You are, as a project manager, the go-to person, and you will be the one that everybody is seeking guidance and steering the ship in the right direction. So managing and preventing the conflict is where they come to you with a problem and feel comfortable talking to you, and that's really, really key. Again, there are techniques that you can use. Simply, just simply be yourself and be open and honest. Don't if you don't know it, don't pretend that you know what to do. If you're stuck and you need people's help, be very open and say, guys, I really don't know. Can you please help me? 99% of the time, you will find that people come and help you. If you go in there with a gun blazing attitude where you know everything and you are the so-called gospel of all the knowledge, that tends to not go down well. You need to be a person that is approachable and easily they can talk to you with confidence. That will mean that you get issues resolved And key thing I would say is when you're managing and preventing these conflicts is just listen, and please do not ignore any issues. So, in summary, guys, when you're managing conflict, identify, acknowledge your conflict, but remember what I said. Please don't ignore conflict. It will get worse the longer you leave it. Once you understand it, analyze, understand it. Use some root cause analysis methods. SWOT analysis if you wish, stakeholder analysis. Make sure you are engaging at the right level at the right time, etc. And then when you've done when you've got people around the table, make sure you're using the following steps. Bring the parties together, lay out the ground rules, find the root cause of the conflict, actively listen at each side actively listen so each side can have their say, establish a desired outcome, get participants to suggest potential solutions, get their buy-in, and agree on a solution, which you document and make sure it's agreed, and then can continue to monitor it. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for listening.